Hello, welcome back to the channel, to the podcast. I'm your host, Albert, and this is Alex as well.
Hello, I'm not the host.
I mean, we're co-hosts. There's only two of us, so. But today we are going to be going over a couple of articles specifically relating to electronic vehicles. Yeah, that's the right word. Electric vehicles. Electric vehicles.
All vehicles are pretty much are electronic at this point.
They have electronics inside of them.
Like, what did I just see? Like, did you see the one car that was like something went wrong with like the system update, so you can't drive your car on like the screen?
Oh,
like,
really?
I don't know what the car was. I saw that like on Twitter like last week or something. It was like the software ever with the software update, you cannot drive your car. Bring it to the mechanic. And
That's why I don't like newer cars personally, just because they're like, oh yeah, we're implementing everything in software, and everything's a subscription too as well.
Yeah, no, they're doing that now too. The subscriptions, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's kind of lame because I'm like, okay, but I purchased my car. I want to be able to use my car.
Yeah.
You know, and it's also like you can't upgrade for certain things. Like I know Tesla does it where you can't upgrade. It's all like, oh, it's all software, but you purchased this car and this is how it was set up at purchase.
Oh, you know, software, you're not allowed to get like the higher package stuff without paying for it, right?
Yeah, I believe so. And so if you buy like a used Tesla, you're kind of like screwed a little bit because it depends on how it was configured or whatever. It's very strange to me, but because I'm like, oh, if you just want to set it up after the fact, you should be able to. I don't think it should be something you're forced into, especially if a car goes through multiple owners, which most cars do. But yeah, the first article, which one was that? Yeah,
it was about the electric roads in Detroit. I believe that was at least that was in the order you sent me. I don't know if that's the order you wanted to talk about them.
That's the order I was going to talk about them.
Okay.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on this?
I think that it's probably a good thing. It's going to make, because a lot of problem people have with adopting electric cars right now is just that the infrastructure is not there.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's holding a lot of people back. Like, this is what my dad talks about all the time. He's like, I won't get an electric car until the infrastructure is there. He's like, and I can't necessarily blame people because it's like, if you only have, an electric charging port one every 300 miles, let's say, hypothetically, but the range of the car is 200 miles. Why would you ever get it? Your electric car is going to be, functionally useless. You can't really take it on long trips. It would just be, for local travel only, but not everybody necessarily uses their car for that.
Right.
So it causes issues. Yeah. So, and then even still, people, if you have like a 200-mile range, if people want to sit there, you have to wait for it to charge. That takes significantly longer than, just pulling over and like taking 5 minutes to fill it up with your gas. You can sit there at a charge for, like a good hour. What are you supposed to do? Like
sit on your phone. So download a episode of Netflix.
Which sit on your phone, which as you're sitting there, it starts dying. So then you plug it into the car, as the car is being charged. Then it's a whole disaster. So like making it so that you can charge it wirelessly and while driving is probably a beneficial thing. Like even they say in the article too, like they could even eventually lead some. So a lot of problem with the electric cars also is that if you want good range, you need a big battery. But like it's almost like exponential. It's exponential. You need an exponentially bigger battery to get like smaller returns on your range because you're adding more weight to the car.
Yeah.
Which makes it use more power. So, but being able to get smaller batteries in there and using those electric roads like they say in the article, you can get smaller batteries, smaller batteries for more range. Sounds like a win-win, but the problem is just going to be implementing those kinds of roads everywhere so they're actually useful.
Yeah. Also, I forgot to mention what this article is actually about. So just to mention
go ahead.
Basically, there is a company called Electreon. They have a project here over in Detroit. And what they're trying to do is at some point set up a roadway that can wirelessly charge your electronic vehicles. Very interesting because again, one of the big problems right now with electronic vehicles is the range as well as just the charging time, right? And then also the amount of weight as well for the actual object, but that also kind of relates to range and stuff like that. So and then there's also the other issue with a battery itself, which it's very easy to start charging it. It's very hard to get it up to 100%, which is why I think that's why Teslas themselves, you don't charge to 100%. I think you go up to like 80%,
Oh, really?
and then you are pretty much there. And then they have like methods to, like their braking method or whatever, to recoup some energy and stuff like that. But I don't think you actually charge to 100% in most of these cars, just because of how much more difficult it is to charge that last
Yeah.
like 20%.
I mean, that also probably helps with battery life too, because they usually, even like for your phones, they say never to really charge it to 100%. You want to keep it like between 80 and 20%, just to improve how long the battery lasts. So I'm sure that's by part of the reason too, is just for make sure the battery stays healthy for longer.
Mm-hmm.
But,
yeah, and also like it's more work. So I think Elon Musk has actually talked about this at some point, specifically for Teslas, and I think it was just talking about, if you go back to high school physics and think about it, when you're charging a battery or a capacitor, you're moving charge from one end to the other, right? On that element. So for like a battery, you're moving it, if you're talking about positive charges, from the negative end to the positive end, because originally it's like there's no voltage difference, and so you're forcing it to create this voltage difference, and that takes work or effort to do that. And so it's very easy to do in the beginning comparatively, but once you already have a ton of positive charges on the end that you're trying to keep adding positive charges to, well, if you remember from physics, positive charges or like charges repel each other, so it becomes a lot harder to continue charging. So that's the reason why as you charge a battery, it becomes more work to charge it. And so that's why it's like, I think Musk had said something along the lines of, and if I'm misquoting, someone correct me in the comments, but that last like 20 to 30% takes as much time as the first 80%, because of just how much more difficult it is to charge that much. And I'm sure it's harder for even like a bigger battery, because at some point you're just creating a huge difference in charge, and so that just becomes so much work to do in an electric vehicle. So that's why it takes so long to charge your vehicles as opposed to just filling it up with gas, right? But for this article specifically, I think this is really cool. I think there was a statement somewhere in this article from another, I think it's a battery related company, or let me see if I could find it. I think it's FreeWire. Yeah, a provider of battery integrated EV charging stations. That's what they had originally started as, and then they switched over at some point to some other type of work. They pivoted. But the senior director from this company said something along the lines of, it's very difficult to set this up unless you're starting a city from scratch, right? And
which makes sense.
Yeah, and you think about like the biggest metropolitan areas in the country, which are like all the big cities, right? Like Seattle or LA or New York, etc. All of these areas are very busy, and part of that busyness is traffic of vehicles. And so practically, like even if you think about New York City or just New York in general, like there's always construction going on, but the amount of work it would take to like reroute all of that traffic for however long it takes to implement wireless charging it's a lot of work. It's tearing up the road, and then it's like implementing this new technology, and then any maintenance that has to go with that, and then on top of that, road maintenance, and then trying to do both of them. It's just a lot of work, and that's my biggest skepticism as well. Even before I got to that section in the article, I was like, well, this isn't just like a pad that's like over a road, right? It's actually underneath the concrete. So you'd either have to like layer it where there's like something in between this charging block, another layer, and then the concrete, or it's like all integrated together. I don't actually know how they're implementing their solution, but my biggest question mark is how much money is that going to cost and who's paying for it?
A lot.
Yeah. So unless there's government initiatives, which is possible, but I don't think it's super practical on a large scale, but it's interesting. Like I'm curious to know where the technology is going
Yeah.
to lead, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like it basically, like they said in the article, like it is interesting, but just hypothetically, it's just not possible to really to implement at any type of wide scale unless you're building all those roads from scratch. Like you can't, like, even when you think about it, the place this would be most useful on is probably like highways and expressways.
Hmm.
You can't just be like, yeah, we're closing like 50 miles of this highway just to put down cables that 10% of cars on the road are going to use.
Right.
So it's not something that I don't think anybody will ever see as a cost effective or time effective stratagem to do that.
Yeah.
So maybe at some time in the future, if it becomes cheaper and electric cars become the majority. But for right
Mhm.
now, I don't see anybody being like, yeah, we're gonna close these roads. Like I said, close these roads for like to add this thing that like a small percentage of vehicles will actually take advantage of. So as
Right.
of right now, I don't think this is a feasible project, large scale. But it's interesting to test and see where it goes. Maybe 20, 30 years from now.
Yeah, and I mean the company itself, Electreon, they are focusing specifically on like commercial fleets, so airport shuttles, delivery trucks, public
Yeah,
buses, stuff like that. And that's probably the good like a good spot to
a good
start,
starting point.
Um
Yeah,
and they specify, we're looking for spots that are easily identifiable that you can map out and know that that's pretty much the route that's going to be taken. And so I think things like setting this up at an airport, like a newer airport, or airports themselves always might be expanding and stuff like that. It might be something to start implementing there, and that could be cool. The one other thing that I think about here is I've I'm not 100% sure, but I guess they would also have to have some type of communication between the car and the charger as well, like the charging platform, to say who's using it.
yeah, it did
Because
mention something like that in the article. I think there was just like one sentence. It's like the car will communicate with the road to see
right,
who's the owner of the car is and if the battery wants to be charged. I
yeah,
don't know how you go about setting that up though.
right.
They really, it
So
was just like in one throwaway sentence in the article, and that stood out to me because
yeah,
that just seems like a very complicated thing you just kind of glanced over. I feel like.
what I wasn't sure about for that is if they were saying that the receiver on the car is just going to say, "Oh, we're ready to charge. We want to be charged," or whatever because we're low on battery, or if it's saying that the owner of the car, their information actually has to be passed through for payment purposes.
Oh, I
i
included it.
I'm not 100% sure because otherwise, like, who would be fronting the bill? It would have to be the individual in the car. So
Yeah.
I think, again, it makes sense if it's like public transit related stuff like buses and things like that, where the city's gonna pay for it anyway, so then it just
Yeah.
kind of makes sense. And that's like a good starting point. But the question is, well, are they essentially just going to be constantly communicating with your car in order to figure out if you want to be charged with, and what information are they taking at that point?
Yep.
That's something I'm not super keen on because we already get our information
Another thing
taken
collecting
by
your
everywhere.
information.
Yeah. So
Like, not even your car is safe. Your car is constantly being analyzed for information.
yeah. So that's something
So
that I'm not a huge
yeah,
fan of, and I think this might end up being another vein where cybersecurity needs to come into play to be like, oh, okay, we need to make sure this communication is secure, that
yeah,
we're not just giving this information out to everyone and all of that. The biggest question marks I would also be having is like, if you're just going to be having an electromagnetic field like just on the ground, right, is that going to potentially impact other people's electronics?
yeah.
That's not something I'm super knowledgeable about.
Every time you
So
cross the street, your phone just stops working.
yeah, um
That would not be cool.
I think it would be a like, I don't think it would stop anything from working necessarily, but my curiosity would be like, well, if your phone has wireless charging, would it just charge your phone? Or does it have to be like on the
But,
ground? Like, I don't know how this
yeah,
works. I would have to dig a little bit deeper to understand the actual
that would
wireless
be cool to
charging
charge your
tech.
phone too,
Yeah, that would be cool, but the
though.
wireless charging tech is something I have very little understanding of. The only other thing that I'm not sure about is when you're charging such a big uh battery and also you're doing it along a long strip, people are essentially just walking over a charger. So I just don't know how that impacts people as well. That's
Yeah,
another weird thing
so
that
like, what do you mean, like electric radiation or something like?
yeah, like just having I mean, I guess on to some degree we're always being bombarded by waveforms and stuff like that. So
Yeah,
probably minimal
I don't think that
impact.
these waveforms would necessarily be a danger to people, but I
Right.
don't know. I'm not a radiologist or whatever,
A
so
radiologist, yeah. I don't know. It's just something that went in my brain or went over my head because I was like, I just I don't know, and I kind of want to learn
yeah.
a little bit more about that as well
Uh-huh.
because wireless technology on like a platform in your room, I understand that, right? It's a very
Mhm.
small surface area, probably not going to impact you. It's also a phone battery as opposed to a car battery, so less charge,
Yep.
and so that's probably fine. But then when you get on a long roadway, it's like this whole roadway is just a giant charger now. So like how exactly
Mhm.
does that work? The other thing is also things like drainage of water and things like that. I don't know if that would impact the creation or these
Yeah,
this
like how would
device.
different stuff on top of a road affect the charging? Like if a road's covered in like snow,
Yeah.
would that affect your ability to charge versus it being, covered in rain or covered in ice or
Hmm.
whatever,
Yeah, that and also
There's a lot of variables that this article doesn't go into detail trying to explain.
yeah. I mean, it makes sense though. This is still in early stages, but along that same lines, I'm thinking like if you have cracks in the road, right? And
Mm.
water permeates across the actual device that's the charger,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
What impact is that going to have? I mean, I'm sure the cables are going to be insulated and all of that, but what is the
Like a
worst
pothole in the
case?
road, how does that affect the charging?
Yeah. What's the worst case that's going to happen if like there's a short somewhere? Like, what does that do?
Yeah.
Stuff like that would
Mhm.
be things I'm curious about because I don't have a lot of exposure to this. I don't use wireless charging. I don't even know. My phone might have wireless charging capabilities, but I don't think I've ever
I don't
used
know
it.
if my phone does, but
Um,
it doesn't matter because usually for a lot of those things, I feel like you have to take off the case anyway, and that was too much effort, so I just plug it in.
yeah, yeah, that's the dumbest part though. But if they can get wireless charging just driving through your car, I mean that would be cool. I just want to know what the other implications of that are on like security,
Yep.
safety, and like privacy. Those are the main things, you know.
Hmm.
And then also who's paying for it, what's it's going to cost, all of that. Because I mean, it's probably just going to be taxes, I guess. If it's like even if it's like a private company doing it, I think this is something that would be
Yeah, if you're on
subsidized
a
by the
road,
government.
stuff, well, or some type of government will get involved.
Yeah,
Be like, we'll
yeah,
we'll give you money to implement, update our infrastructure or whatever. Go
mhm,
ahead, go crazy.
yeah,
And you're like,
yeah. And then the other thing would be like, would this end up being like another situation with like the MTA, where it's one company because of all of the infrastructure concerns?
mm,
Because you can't have like 10 different companies designing their own electromagnetic chargers,
yep.
right? And then just being like, oh, they all just have to be stacked next to each other on the same road. That's just not possible. There's not enough
Yeah,
road.
you'd have to have one person, one company in charge of the whole thing, I'd
Yeah,
imagine.
which I don't love the idea of that. I'm not a huge fan of monopolies, but you know, it is what
I
it
don't think
is.
anybody is.
Yeah, but so I mean, I think it's interesting. I guess we'll potentially hear about this again once they actually set everything up in Detroit. But I'm
Mhm.
curious to see where this goes. Also, it does seem like they're not the only company that is doing this, right? There are other companies that also seem to
Yeah,
be
no, it seems like it
looking
is
into
a
this now.
market that people are investing in.
Yeah, which makes
So,
sense. The one of the biggest concerns is how long it takes to charge your stupid car. You know, who wants to waste all their time doing that?
yeah,
And then
like I was
obviously
talking about
range.
before, it's like really the things holding back electric cars are how long it takes to charge and the lack of infrastructure for your range.
Right.
Can't really, not like you can do like, a 6 hour drive on those things.
Yeah.
It's because you might get into an area where there's just, no electric chargers anywhere near you, and what do you do?
Hmm.
It's not like you can stop somebody on the road and be like, "Do you have a tank of gas I could borrow?" Like, yeah, or go to a gas station, get like a tank of gas, and bring it back. Can't do that. What are you gonna tell them? Come back with an outlet? Like that's just not something. That's not something that's feasible.
Right.
So it's just the infrastructure is not there it's like it says in the article. It is like a chicken and egg problem because like they're trying to work on the infrastructure, but the electric vehicle support is not there for this kind of infrastructure. But the electric vehicle support will not be there until there is infrastructure.
Hmm.
So it's kind of just like a weird like circular problem that I don't know how they're gonna figure out how to get around that.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think Tesla's done a good job, I think, in some areas with this, right? Like near metropolitan areas, but it's
Yeah,
again, you're exactly right. Like trying to do like a cross country trip in an
it's not
EV is not
possible.
possible
EV.
because there are so many places that just don't have any or a lot of like EV charging stations, you
Yeah,
know? And so like that's something that you'd always have to be aware of, and that's just such a pain to think about.
yeah.
Um yeah,
Like
I
EV is a five. It's just something that's like to and from work, and you live in like a metropolitan area.
yeah.
That's pretty much all you could use it for. You
Mhm.
can't like so you can't use it for like any crazy like cross country trips or anything. 'Cause you can't guarantee that the infrastructure will be there. You can guarantee that there will be gas stations. You can't guarantee there'll be EV charging places.
Right.
So that's why people are just gonna go with a gas car 99% of the time.
Yeah. And then again, I think another big thing with people, I don't know if a lot of people think this way right now, but like I think people have become less interested in subscription based models because there's too many of them now. And
Yeah.
so I think people are also like, well, if you get a new car, especially if it's an electric car, they probably just have an iPad in there, right, as their like screen and
Yeah.
control system. And you're like, okay, there's definitely software locked items in this car that you're just going to be like selecting. And it's, I mean, I don't think that's just an electric car problem. That's just a
This
car.
isn't like a car problem at this
Yeah,
point.
yeah, it's a modern car problem. And so I really dislike that. I understand that it's cheaper for a company to,
To just make one model and lock it behind
yeah,
software has to be a
yeah.
generally different models.
And even then it's like, oh, it's cheaper to not buy like all the little knobs and things like that and mold them and set them up. That's
Mhm.
apparently more expensive than just getting a singular tablet and then doing software controls for everything. So I understand that it's a cost effective method. However, it's kind of stupid that you can't just, like, I don't know if it's just, maybe it's just Tesla, but I'm sure there are others where you buy a car, you set its like settings for like what items you've purchased, and then you can't change it afterwards. And that to me is the dumbest thing in the world. So I
Mhm.
just think that that's like kind of stupid. um but yeah, I think we can probably switch over to the Tesla specific article as well. I think this, most of this is kind of touched upon with the previous article, but
Yeah.
they're mainly just saying that Tesla's also working on.
Yeah, but I don't understand the Tesla idea here because they're saying it's like just for like charging it in your garage,
Right. Yeah.
which I don't see what is the advantage to tearing up your whole garage and putting a floor in when you could just get a wall mounted charger and then just plug it in and have it charge overnight regardless it'll be full in the morning. Like I just don't see
Yeah.
the point. It just
I
this is just
think
gonna seem like completely pointless. A lot of extra work and way more expensive for no payoff. I don't see what the
yeah.
reason is.
This seems like it's a more of just like a engineering problem of like, yes, let's do this because it's fun. It
Yeah.
doesn't seem
Like there's
like
no like even if
practical.
you're like, oh, but it will charge faster. It's like it really doesn't matter because 90%
Yeah.
of the time, if somebody's charging an EV in their garage, it's because they're home for work and they're just charging it overnight until they go to work next morning. So it doesn't
Right.
matter if it charges faster. It's going to be sitting on that charger, a good
Yeah.
like 12 hours probably. So like,
The
what's even like the point at that point? Like, I just don't see the point of, like I said, going through all that trouble of tearing up your whole garage just to install a wireless pad when you could just have a wall-mounted charger.
mhm.
It
Yeah,
makes no sense.
I think the only way that this would make sense is if you're at a company and your company gives you Teslas for some reason, and they're like, yes,
Most companies come-
we're just going to have like a bunch of these wireless charging mats or whatever set up in our specific garage, right? So it's like your work garage, you
Yeah.
drive in for the day, and then while you're after you drive in, you're charging, right? You don't even have to think about it. So then the company doesn't
Does that
have to
even save
like,
like that much more space versus just having like
I don't think
a
so.
couple spots and then like a charging island and then a couple spots and like a charging island? Like, does it
I
really save that much extra space?
I don't think
I really
so.
just don't see a use case for it.
Yeah, so personally, like, I don't think so, because like the actual charging stations or whatever, they're not that big.
No, they're not at all.
So like if you have a regular charging station set up at your workplace and you use that, that's not going to be that much more. I don't think it's going to be more effective at all. I think it's just like, oh, it looks
You
cool.
take up a little bit more space, but
Yeah.
not worth it compared to the cost of tearing up the whole garage.
Yeah, I feel like it's more of a novelty situation right now. So it's either like a big business might do it if they have a bunch of EVs in their fleet for some reason, or someone who's already like super rich.
And a super EV enthusiast was like, yeah, I'm gonna tear up my garage just to see what the technology's like. And it's like, that's so ridiculous. Do something better with your money, bro.
Yeah. So I agree. It's not the best, and I don't know. I think it might be a little bit of a waste of time right now.
I agree.
Like I think the roadway, it makes more sense.
Has more
than
potential.
This. Yeah, because this is just like, oh, you're gonna waste even more money because you don't want to plug in your car.
Yeah.
Like that's what it is.
It's not even like it's a give the go out of your way, or it's super tedious.
Yeah.
Plugging your car in your garage. You really take like what 5 extra seconds. To really like without exaggerating, what could it be 30 seconds? You just walk over to the wall mount, you take the charger out, and you put it in the car. Like it's not like you're saving that much time, or it's like, oh my god, this makes my life so much easier. It's not like it's a hard or arduous thing to do to begin with. So I don't understand the point of this product.
Yeah, I mean that's also why they're probably still in development for it, right? It's not something that the public would really need or something that anyone would really like feasibly order a bunch of, right? I don't think this would be a successful item right now. I don't even know when it would be viable. You know, when would it be viable? So unless it's like you just place the mat over your garage or something.
That's not what it sounded like though in the article.
No, it's not. It's not right now. Like if it was that, okay,
it's
then
like
it would
a
more about
plug that you could put down and it will wireless charge. Like how your phones work. You put the phone on like the pad and then it charges. If it was like that, for an EV, I could see. Okay, maybe there's some point to this. It's like you just drive it over the mat and it starts charging. But I just don't see being like, I want to tear up the entire concrete floor.
Right.
To put in a couple cables.
Because also, what if you sell or trade your EV for like a normal car? That's not an EV anymore.
It's just, then you waste all that money for nothing.
Yeah, it's just a waste. So
at least like if there is a mat, when you sell the EV, you could sell the mat with it.
Exactly. And I'm sure like if they were to sell this, there's going to be a huge price tag associated with it as well.
Oh, obviously.
So like it's not going to be a feasible purchase for most people unless it's subsidized by the government in some way, which, you know,
I don't think this would be subsidized by the government. Though. This is definitely like EVs a private garage thing.
Right. EVs were for a long time in terms of like you could get like tax exemptions or like there were certain like things that you could do when you were buying Teslas and stuff for a while, so I'm sure some of those still exist, but
you could do like you could use it as like a tax write-off or something.
Yeah, potentially something like that.
Yeah, I guess I could see that, but like I don't think that there's a point doing that.
Yeah, I don't agree with that right now. So I think it's something that they're working on. I mean, I don't know if it's the most purposeful.
It's a thing that people are spending time and resources to develop.
Yeah, honestly, I'd prefer they just design a hybrid Tesla, personally.
Yeah.
Then waste their time.
Even like the third article talks about that, how just people widely are going for hybrids over the EVs.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I mean, I also don't know too many electric car companies outside of Tesla, right? It's not something that
is Tesla the only one that's like predominantly electric? I feel like most just major car brands just have like an EV option.
Yeah,
I don't think there's anyone that's specialized entirely in electric cars like Tesla does.
Yeah, I think that mainly is Tesla. There might be like some smaller companies that do similar stuff.
Yeah, Tesla's gonna be like the biggest EV only company, I would say though.
Yeah,
I know like Ford does like an electric F-150. Like they basically just have electric versions of cars that already exist like these other companies, but there's no company that's purely all EV like Tesla is. At least that's not as big and well known as Tesla.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. In your opinion, do you prefer like a modern car or an older car? And then, do you want an electric car or not right now?
I don't know. I don't know if I get an electric car right now, just because like the infrastructure's not there. I think an electric car is probably a good thing to get in the long term because it's better for the environment and everything.
Right.
I'm not trying to have a beach. As much as making my house a beachfront property would be nice, I'm not trying to have a beachfront property. So the EV adoption would be a good idea, but like we keep saying, it's just not something that's entirely feasible. That's probably why like most people are going for hybrids and stuff, because you get the advantage of being like, I'm going green with, at least I have electric for some of it. But then it's like if you're in an area where it's like you have absolutely no charging ports near you, it's like, okay, at least I'm not stuck in the middle of nowhere. I have a gas backup just in case. Which is definitely a way more positive looking option than a pure EV.
Yeah, I agree. I think that if I was to ever get like a brand new car, it would be an EV, or sorry, not an EV, a hybrid, over an EV, and even over like a traditional car, just to have all the options available, right? And the only other thing is like, I don't necessarily know if we're getting that much of an improvement on an electric vehicle versus a traditional like gas powered vehicle in terms of protecting the environment, because you still have to generate electrical energy and like
I feel like the long-term goal is probably eventually making all that energy just green, so it's green all the way through. But that's a big thing at best. I feel like that is when people say it's better for the environment, because obviously, right, it's like, yeah, you're charging it with like off the coal power plant, that's not really doing much. But I think the way people are looking at it is it's greener because electricity is making the switch to green because it's wind power and solar power. So by switching to an EV, like getting ahead of the curve and like getting ready for when electricity goes green. And I'm like, but it's not really there yet. So it's not really doing too much. I mean, I'm sure it's still an improvement of driving a gas car.
Yeah,
I would say, but I don't think it's as crazy as these companies are trying to make it out to be. But
yeah, I would hope it's like at least marginally better, but we don't really know specifics. At least the two of us don't. Maybe some other people do, but
we are uneducated.
Yeah, I do think that if we had a lot more nuclear power, then sure, I think it would make more sense, because we'd also
nuclear power is a good option. It's just that
people don't want to live near.
So.
Yeah, people don't want to live near power plants and stuff like that, which I understand, but it's personally, I'm like, okay, if we can get like super higher confidence rates in nuclear power, then that would be like efficient, and
people
that'd
just
be
get so scared when they hear nuclear, but nuclear is really not that bad. Especially the technologies have vastly improved since like Chernobyl and stuff. So like people like think about that like, I'm like, that's like 50 years ago, 40, 50 years ago, whatever. So it's really not technology. That's what everything has improved greatly since then. So there's just people hear the word nuclear like, and I'm like, all right,
just have a
I guess we'll just I guess that beachfront. Get ready to sell my house as beachfront property because it's coming.
Yeah, I think that if we can get nuclear power consistently everywhere, then I would be a lot more willing to do EV personally, because then I'm like, okay,
it's actually making a substantial improvement.
Yeah, and then it'll be a lot cheaper too.
Yeah,
because whenever you have like an electronic or in a nuclear power plant, right, electricity prices drop significantly, and so I'm like, okay, if you can do that and make a push on a governmental level to do more EV releases on a company level, then I'll be like, okay, cool, makes sense to get an EV, add a few more charging stations, have them more available throughout the country. Then it would make a lot more sense. And you're like, okay, it's going to be significantly cheaper, it's going to be better for the environment, lower risk, right? As long as you can do that, then I'm like, okay, all on board for electronic vehicles. But getting to that point, it's like a lot of people are afraid of nuclear power plants. It's hard to open one, and it's hard to keep them open, right? Because usually if you have one, people are going to protest about them and say, we really want this closed, and then the end result is higher prices on electricity for people, which is ridiculous. So on a practical level, it just doesn't make sense until you have super cheap electricity for everyone, and then and clean, right? And then you're like, okay, cool, you're all good. We can be happy with this
This
solution.
sounds like a purely like utopian idea that is not happening within our lifetime.
Like for nuclear power specifically, I think
It's
that
like in general, you're talking like widespread nuclear power, green power. It's significantly cheaper. I feel like that's a pipe dream. We're not going to see that before we die.
I think if we get more nuclear power plants, those areas will be significantly cheaper because
Yeah, but I don't think we're getting anywhere near the widespread nuclear power plants that we need
yeah,
within
I agree
any
with you.
reasonable time.
Yeah, which is that's the big thing where I'm like, okay, without that, you're not gonna get there with wind and solar. It's not gonna happen. So I'm like, I don't really know how good or like how green EV solutions are because your power is still coming from like greenhouse gases and stuff. So
Yeah,
I don't really see it as the better or like the more environmentally friendly option just yet. I guess I'd have to look at an emissions report compared to like the emissions from like the power plants that are supplying electricity. You know, I don't know if that comparison has been done yet, but
yeah, this is like a million cars feeding off a coal power plant. A big difference compared to those million cars being on gas. Like I'm not sure.
Right. So I'm not sure about that. That'd be a good thing to learn, I guess, as a follow up. Yeah. So I guess we can go over to the last topic now.
Yeah, I kind of did touch on it a little bit already.
Yeah, we did. Just slightly. This one is analysts expect US EV sales to temper in 2024. So this is interesting. I think this also kind of coincides with the potential for the used vehicle and new vehicle markets reducing in prices as well as we get further and further away from 2020. So it's interesting that like I think as a general trend, it's like people are probably waiting longer to make purchases on cars, but like we also have access to like the factories designing parts again. So there's kind of a shift in the
there's a lot of cars in the market right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I do think that now is probably a lot better to buy a car in general, but it is interesting that not as many people are looking for EV solutions, which I think probably also relates to people like having to commute again more and like potentially people moving away from like bigger cities and maybe not having access to these solutions anymore. I think that could also play a bit into
I think
it.
it's just also, how many early adopters in metropolitan areas can you possibly have?
Right, exactly.
Every metropolitan area, has, I guarantee most of those the sales are within metropolitan areas.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So like, I mean, how many times can like nobody's like buying one in the middle of like the Great Plains where there's like a house every like 20 miles or whatever. No one's buying an EV out there.
Right.
Because there's just absolutely zero infrastructure for it out there. Like so, like I mean, so what is the percentage of people do you want in a city to own EVs? Eventually, you're gonna hit the point where everybody who wants an EV in those areas is gonna have one, and then you're just not buying anymore because people in not metropolitan areas they're not incentivized to buy electric vehicles. Yeah. So eventually, you're just gonna hit as much market as you can reach, and then that's just gonna be the end of it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it said that there's like a extra week or 8 or 9 days that like these vehicles are staying out
on the lot. Yeah, it's like they stay on the lot like 9 days longer on average.
Yeah, I mean, I will say like if you're interested in buying an EV, this might be a better time because you might be more likely to get a better deal.
The price might go down.
Yeah, either that or probably just getting a used car in general. Probably a better time now than it was like 2 years ago when I bought my car. So
yeah, yeah, 2 years ago was not a good time to buy a car.
Yeah, I bought a car as soon as I moved out here because I needed it.
Yeah, that was not 2022 was not a good year for car buying.
Yeah. I didn't have much of a choice though. I was like, oh dang, I can't buy a new car right now because it's gonna be like 6 weeks of wait time, and then also like
used cars were through the roof because new cars are taking 6 weeks to get there.
Yep, exactly. But I do think that it's an interesting trend. I guess we'll see how things continue in the next like couple months and see if things swing back up. But overall, I think that it's pretty clear like everyone who wanted an EV has probably gotten one at this point. You know, maybe not everyone, but like most people.
I think that article said too that there are a lot of people who are interested in getting EVs, or they just don't believe for whatever reason it's the right time to buy one, so they're opting for
Right.
hybrid,
Right.
which I think
Yes.
is
Yeah.
probably your best option right now.
Yeah.
Like,
I
because
agree.
we have iterated many times. I think just the infrastructure is just not there for EVs. I would be concerned with buying one myself. I feel like,
Yeah.
at least with hybrid, you have in case of any emergency, you have a gas backup.
Yeah. And that's
You
the
know,
biggest thing for me. I'm like, I wouldn't want to put all my eggs in the basket of, oh, where's the latest or
exactly.
the closest charging station?
Closest
How much
charging
range do I
station,
have?
and
Yeah.
then you look it up. It's like 300 miles away, and you have like 100
Hmm.
miles of range left. You're like,
Well, I'm
I
screwed.
guess I'm gonna die in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. Yep. And so
I mean, I'm not you can really do there.
yeah, makes a lot of sense. And then also like there are a bunch of delays apparently in production, which seems to be going on. I think it says Tesla might delay $1 billion or $1 billion manufacturing investment in Mexico. GM's pumping
I,
brakes
yeah, I
on
think that
truck
was all those
production.
they were delaying that stuff because the sales were lower than expected.
Yeah,
So they're not investing the money into it.
right. And so
Um,
I think it all kind of makes sense, and we'll just have to wait and see how this goes over the next year or two. Like,
yeah, I
I think,
think for see widespread EV adoption is going to be a good couple decades. I think.
yeah,
I think the technology is just too new right now. Still,
right.
like you have to give it a good like 20 years probably,
Hmm.
and you'll see it start to really make that shift.
Do you think we're closer to having EVs or having like driverless cars for like Ubers and like ride shares and stuff?
I feel like the autonomous driving that's even going to be harder for people to convince to get
Hmm.
over EVs. I feel like just because people are not going to want to trust the technology.
I do think they already exist in like trial runs in different cities and
Oh no,
stuff like that.
I think I thought I assumed your question was about like widespread.
Widespread.
You're
Oh,
talking like
widespread.
widespread
Yeah, yeah,
adoption.
yeah.
Yeah, like I feel like convincing people to get an autonomous car is going to be even harder. Like the average person is going to be way harder to convince them to get that than
Mhm.
ever getting an EV. And it's
Yeah.
already pretty hard to convince someone to get an EV. I think that people are just going to be like, I don't want to trust this, AI or this robot to do the
Mhm.
driving. I'd rather do it myself. Even if it gets to the point where they're significantly better than a human ever could be. It's just that you're putting the fate in something you can't control. I think is what's going to drive a lot of people to not to go for that option.
I think as long as there are people driving, driving yourself will be the better option
Hmm.
compared to a like AI. At
Hmm.
least for now, maybe like in a couple
Like if it was
years.
if every car on the road was part of like an autonomous network,
Yeah.
you'd be like, that'd be pretty safe. But I feel like if you're in an autonomous car and there's somebody driving behind a wheel, there's
Mhm.
no way that autonomous car is going to be able to figure out any possible thing that humans going to do because
Right.
humans are unpredictable.
Right.
It's not going to be prepared for every type of situation that human driver could put that car in,
Yeah, I
no
think
matter how much training you do.
yeah, that's definitely true because the biggest issue is like you need to make sure in real time you're getting as much enough information to make decisions, right?
Yeah.
For a autonomous vehicle, the biggest variable is pedestrians and other vehicles, right? Those are like some of the biggest variables you have to think about. Sure, I mean there are probably items that could land on the road and stuff like that. That's also a thing, but those are like the most common things. It's like people walking past you or a vehicle that's going to crash into you.
Yep.
But if every single vehicle, it's just like you plug in your GPS location that you're trying to go to, you plug it in, you're driven over there, you just sit back and relax, and everyone's doing that, well, then you'll get things like seamless merging and stuff like that. Like that could
Yep.
happen, right? But the only way that would work is if
It's
no one was
everybody's in
allowed
an
to
autonomous
drive.
car.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
no driving anymore. It's just you're always a passenger, that's it. And I don't think that would ever happen. So for
No.
that reason, it's like, yeah, it's going to be much harder to get widespread adoption of that. I think it'll be easiest to get it in metropolitan areas because we have
Yeah,
grid-like
same with
structures.
EVs.
Yeah, like New York City. New York City has a very grid-like structure. You just download a map, right? And then you have
Yeah.
the full map of the city. You know all the addresses. You're good. You just got to update different locations for like different maps locations, I guess. That would be the only thing, right? And then the only thing you'd have to think about is beyond that, just traffic, people, stuff like that. In a city that's super congested, you're going to have a lot better time than a
Hmm.
wide open road with like
Hmm.
tons of traffic still. If people are driving fast, it's going to be a lot harder to deal with. So I
Yep.
agree. EVs are probably a lot closer. I do
EVs
think.
maybe 20 years. I'll give autonomous like 60 years at
Mhm.
minimum.
What about? I think. Yeah, that's probably a decent timeline. The only caveat I would say is I think that metropolitan autonomous vehicles could probably beat out widespread EV um, adoption.
Maybe.
So I think
That
that
could be possible. I don't know. Maybe I just haven't really. I mean, I don't really follow what's going on with autonomous cars, but I feel like I don't know. I feel like they're just probably not that far yet.
mhm.
But I want to know because I don't really follow the field. So
Yeah, I haven't looked a lot into it in the last year or so. So yeah, I'd be curious to see how the whole AI revolution would have impacted it. Because I
mhm.
mean, the way you train EVs, or sorry, not EVs, autonomous vehicles, is very similar to how you train anything else. It's just with input data,
Yeah,
training it, and stuff like that. Um, the only question mark would be like, has there been a huge influx in new data to utilize? I don't think it's to the same degree as like ChatGPT, right?
mhm.
Because that's just, oh, any user can just go on and type in prompts and figure out if this is a decent response to the prompts that are being provided. You don't really have that for cars because it's a much
No,
more critical and sensitive area. So
yeah.
yeah. But yeah, that's all I think that we had for today. I hope you all enjoyed the conversation. I will try to link below the articles as well that we were looking at.
If you forgot, spam the comments, boost us in the algorithm, and then even if you did forget, like the video. If you remembered, like the video, and comment. Wow, Albert, I'm so happy you remember to put the links in the description
Or
because
yell at me for not doing it as well.
yeah, yep. Either or, like the video and comment, boost us in the algorithm because yes.
Alrighty, guys. Catch you later. Bye.